Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of week 6. I hope you guys are having a great week thus far. This video will be going over chapter 12, which is on public relations as a profession. Now, I worked for public relations for a little over 5 years. I worked in nonprofit communication for the most part for the American Red Cross, the American Heart Association, and UAB Medicine. Public relations was never something I really wanted to go into when I was in college, but after I worked my career in journalism for over a decade, it was really a great way to use my writing skills and passion for telling stories in a way that was a little more lifestyle friendly than journalism, because I transferred my career to PR once I had my daughter. So if you're not sure whether you want to go into journalism or PR, the great news is that the skills really translate back and forth between one another. I could step into a newsroom right now and do well. I could go back into PR and do well. So really having those foundational tools of good writing are going to help you in the job market, no matter what profession you choose. However, PR has a few specific things that we need to talk about. So let's discuss. So this may be what you think of when you think of PR, whether it's Olivia Pope's strategic communications and fixing things, whether it's Samantha Jones and the life of the party all the time, or client relations like Jerry Maguire, or even government relations like CJ on West Wing. There are all different types of media representations of PR out there in the entertainment world. However, many of them are not very accurate. Public relations is actually an applied social science. It's something that really needs to be studied because it is the ability to influence behavior, motivate individuals or groups to take action, and changing of public opinion and attitude about something. And so it really draws on techniques from several social sciences. So if you're looking for good electives to take outside of the communication department, I highly suggest taking courses in psychology, sociology, political science, economics, anthropology, and geography, because these are all the social sciences that PR is built on. Now, we've talked a little before when I was going over all writing professions about what public relations involves. The main key for public relations is influencing public opinion. Whether you're managing the public, stakeholders, or the media, you're really working to either change, support, or enhance attitudes and opinions about your client or organization through the use of public relations tactics. Now, there is a special brand of PR called strategic or crisis communication, and we can discuss that maybe in our next video with media relations. But it's important to know that PR is a very broad term for a lot of different things that you can do for an organization. Some of the main skills that you need for PR include writing, and I cannot emphasize enough that it's so important to be multimedia and focused so that you can write for any type of platform. That's why being at Montevallo is such a great benefit to you, because you're going to learn about all types of writing, which will make you a better PR professional. You also need to know a little bit about design. If you have no graphic design experience, it might be an important elective for you to consider. Even just being able to use Canva and placing things around in appropriate and aesthetic ways is really important for PR. PR is increasingly becoming reliant on analytic reports, meaning knowing what your data shows and means. So what does a like on a social media post mean? How many shares means that you reached a broad audience? So understanding the analytics, especially of digital content, but really kind of the performance aspects of all of your produced content. Another important aspect of PR is ethics. PR is one of those industries that gets a bad rap for really not having ethical boundaries, but that's just generally not true. There are many organizations like PRSSA that have very strict ethical codes of conduct for public relations professionals, and many PR professionals are some of the most ethical people I've met. And so it's very important that you know the difference between right and wrong in PR, because it's easy to step into that wrong area. However, the industry as a whole very much supports ethical responsibility. Now, you can work in PR in many different ways. I'll go over some of those in a minute, but it's important to know that you can either work in internal public relations for a corporation or at a firm where you're working with multiple clients. And as I've said before, this is one of the fastest growing professions in all of the United States. And so it's a great time to be interested in public relations. Now, public relations is not just something that you can walk into and just sit down and write or come up with a commercial. It's really a planned process. You need to understand that PR campaigns don't just magically appear. Instead, they are based on research, objectives, and strategies that are continually evaluated and must be measured against goals. So PR professionals use two different types of processes. You might hear both of them discussed. PR professionals love acronyms, I will tell you. But the two acronyms for really the planning process of PR are the RACE process, which is research, action plan, communicate, and evaluate, and the ROPES process, which your textbook discusses, and we will continue to use in this class, and that's research, objectives, programming, evaluation, and stewardship. Now, the first part of any public relations campaign process is research. I cannot tell you how underutilized research is in PR. In order to understand an organization, your environment, your situation, the products that you have, the services you do, problems and opportunities for your client, internal and external publics, which is evaluating your audience, and knowing your competitors, all of these things must be learned through research. And there are many different types of research that PR professionals rely on. Some of the most common include surveys, in-depth interviews, focus groups, experiments, content analysis, ethnography, and secondary research. If you haven't taken some of our communication courses in research methods, I highly encourage you to do this, because knowing some of these research tools will really set you apart as a PR professional. The second step of RACE is action steps. In ROPES, it's known as objectives. This is when you're setting out the campaign's goals or desired outcomes, and typically these are going to be based on your client, whether that's an external client, if you're working at a firm, or your internal organization's goals. A campaign without goals is not very effective, because you don't know how effective it is if you're not measuring your goals, if you don't know what you want. And a lot of campaigns become very scattered because of the lack of objectives out front. So there are two types of objectives in the ROPES process. The first is outputs, and this is what you're going to create. The second is outcomes, and this is really what your client cares about. Do they want attention from the public? Do they want a rebranding? Do they want buyers? Do they want volunteers? So knowing what your organization wants will help shape the PR campaign and make it really important. Something that I like to think about when I think about objectives is the SMART objectives. And I don't mean smart by meaning like they're good. I am using an acronym. I know PR professionals, we just love them. Your goals should be specific. They should address who, what, where, when, why, and which. They need to be measurable. You need to be able to track the process and the outcomes. So you need to say, I want to increase reach of our commercial by 8%. And know how much 8% of your market is, right? So they need to be something that you can say, yes, we did this, or no, we didn't, when you're evaluating the campaign. They need to be attainable goals too. It's great to shoot for the stars, but you're not going to get every single person to purchase your products. So know what your goals are and know that they're reasonable. Make sure your goals are relevant, especially to your client. What you want out of a campaign may not be what your client wants out of a campaign. So make sure that they are worthwhile goals that you can reach. And finally, they should be timely. Your objectives should always include a time limit. If you say, I want to increase my number of followers by 10%, that's great. It's measurable, it's obtainable, it's worthwhile. However, it doesn't tell you the time in which it will take you to do that. You could do that in 5 years and still reach that goal. So instead, you need to place a time limit, either by stating a specific date or by giving a period of time like 6 months, 6 weeks, etc. In race, the next step is called communicate. In ropes, it's called programming. So this is kind of the meat of your campaign. This is what we as consumers actually see in terms of public relations. You're going to need to know what your main talking points are, what your theme is, kind of that common thread that's going to run throughout all of the pieces that you create. And you also need to know what tactics you're going to use. Public relations is really fun because you get to use all different kinds of communication strategies, whether that's face-to-face, in person, whether it's at special events, like a fundraising event, whether it's creating a website, or maybe you're making a newsletter, maybe you're appearing on TV or making a film. You could even be doing social media or customer service relations. All of these things fall under the umbrella of PR, which makes it really important that you understand what programs you're actually going to use within your campaign. This is also why, as media professionals, it's important for you to learn multiple channels and audiences. You need to be a multimedia writer in today's convergent media. You may say, I love photography or I love videography and I would never want to touch print. Or you could be that person that just likes to write and you don't know how to take a photo to save your life. To be a good multimedia journalist, you really need to be a jack of all trades and understand how all of these channels work so you can reach your audience in multiple ways. That is what will set you apart as a true PR professional. Now, evaluation is the same in both the race and ropes models. Evaluation is really important, and it shouldn't be done just at the end of the campaign. You should be doing it throughout the campaign. Because what if you release a PR campaign and it's not very effective? What if it's not meeting those benchmark goals that you're hoping to meet? You still have the ability to change some of the content, to pivot, and to really create something even better. So you're going to use what's called a conversion funnel. The conversion funnel you can see here on the right, and it really states that sometimes your goals are going to be to create awareness. Sometimes it's going to be to create a liking of your brand. Sometimes it's just to get interest or fellow support. Maybe you're creating a desire for someone to buy something before they actually convert or buy the product. So you can see as the conversion funnel goes down, you're going to have fewer and fewer people convert to that final impact on your revenue and bottom line. But if you as a PR professional can track, well, by showing this commercial to 10,000 people, 10,000 people had the opportunity to be aware of our brand, and now we have gotten some people to like our post. That's creating an affinity for us. Maybe they like and follow our page now. Now we have interest and support of our brand. Maybe you're selling a product, and so they have gone as far to get on your website, look at your product, and they've even placed it in the cart, but they haven't actually bought it. And so that's where that desire and reach category would be. The final one is the conversion in sales, which would be when the customer actually purchases something, or maybe they're signing on to donate money to your nonprofit. So you can see that it's important to track all of these things so that once you get to the ROI, or the return on investment, when you're coming back to your client and saying, look, I made a great PR campaign for you, you don't have to just show the impact on the revenue and the bottom line. Instead, you can come back and show them all of the ways that your campaign was effective. It's also important when you're back in your objectives or your goals measure in the ropes process that you think about all 5 of these levels in the conversion funnel process. The final piece of the public relations process, and really this is something that I've seen added in recent years to the ropes model. Your textbook doesn't actually address it, but I think it's really important. We have pluralized or made ropes plural now in the ropes process model because stewardship is becoming increasingly important for PR. And this isn't just doing good for your community, although it absolutely should be about that. It's also about how you're going to maintain ethical responsibility to your client and to the public at large. If your client wants to, sell their skin whitening products, you need to think about what their responsibility to an audience and the implications that that product could have, and whether you feel ethically okay promoting that in terms of stewardship to the larger community. Stewardship is also important because a key aspect of public relations is maintaining relationships with clients, with stakeholders, media practitioners, and with your public and your consumers. So maintaining those relationships doesn't stop when you begin a campaign. You should continue nurturing those relationships and building those relationships over time. One way to maintain those relationships is through I can't even say the word, y'all, is by giving back to those people that have given to you. So you may, if you're talking about media relations and a journalist calls you and needs an interview or needs an expert for something, you need to help them because that's part of maintaining your relationship. So the next time you have a campaign and you need to pitch something to the media, they'll be more likely to work with you. So as I talked about earlier, there are many different types of public relations. The most popular is working with an agency. This is probably what you think of when you think of PR, where you have a lot of PR professionals in one building working for one firm, and then they go and they bring in clients that they work with. One of the benefits of working with an agency is that you are never working with the same product or client twice. You may be on the same project for a number of months or years, but you get a lot of variety in your work. Internal communications or PR is more about working with a business that you stay with the entire time. So you're actually employed by that business. One of the benefits here is that it's much easier to develop brand voice, and you really kind of get to know the goals and the research a lot better. So like when I was working with UAB Medicine, I always knew what our tagline was and I didn't have to think about that. And so it was great to be able to work for the same client all the time because it cuts out some of the work involved. Now, a nonprofit public relations person is really going to be a jack of all trades because most nonprofits cannot afford to hire multiple people for their organization. And so someone working in nonprofit PR gets the benefit of being able to give back to their community, being passionate about the cause that they're working for. However, you should know that, a lot of times you're working in a solo team, and a lot of it is more based on fundraising or political support rather than getting money. And then the final type of PR that is becoming increasingly important in today's political age is government PR. And this could be working for an individual candidate. It could be working for a government organization. And a lot of organizations are really starting to do this. We will be speaking with someone who is a PIO, a public information officer with a local police department here in Alabama. She is a government employee. So it's kind of like being an internal communication, but has the additional responsibility of upholding government and civic duty. Another resource that I wanted to mention in this video was the PRSSA, which is the Public Relations Student Society of America. Unfortunately, the University of Montevallo is not large enough to hold its own PRSSA chapter. However, they still have great free resources for students who are interested in public relations, so you definitely need to check out this website. Now, the main task of a PR professional are to write and send news releases and stories. We're going to be talking about this and pitching news in greater detail in next Tuesday's video on media relations. Another main thing that most PR professionals do is to maintain conversations across digital channels such as social media or websites. You need to write and design online and print publications. That could be anything from a web page to a flyer that you're handing out. You need to know how to handle strategic communication campaigns, whether that's with internal or external audiences. And that really involves kind of dealing with crises as they come. You can also work in kind of relationship building through engaging, interacting, and recruiting community members, groups, donors, and stakeholders. You may even have to write speeches. So if you're a good public speaker and you really like writing for public forums, that is kind of a dying art, but it is a wonderful art that is still very much needed. And in fact, most PR professionals at some point will have to at least write talking points for stakeholders to address media and other things, which we, again, will be working on next week. You need to be able to counsel managers or people within your organization, even clients, on communication issues. So you need to be comfortable kind of taking that leadership counseling position in PR because you're going to be working with a lot of clients and you need to be the expert on communication when you're in that role. You need to be able to manage publicity, especially with special events. I know for a lot of students, this is probably one of the most attractive parts of PR, but it's also one of the most stressful because special events kind of have a mind of their own and they're a little bit wild. But publicity, especially with special events, is important to know. And of course, you're going to need to know how to manage crisis because you never know when someone within your organization is going to need some crisis management. So these are some of the key skills and tasks that you need to be comfortable with if you're considering a career in PR. Now, something I often get asked for public relations is who is the public in public relations? Who are we actually working for? Well, the interesting answer is the public is nearly everyone for PR. As a PR professional, you are working with the media. You're working with your own firm or organization's employees in internal communication. You're working with government entities. You're working with communities. You're working with people who could potentially buy your product or agree to volunteer for your nonprofit. You may have to work with other businesses. When I was working for the American Heart Association, I worked with some of the top clients in all of Alabama to get donors and corporate sponsors for our events. You also need to be comfortable working with investors. I worked with multimillionaires while working with the American Heart Association so that they would donate their finances and invest in research dollars for the American Heart Association. So you're working with everyone from someone who may be homeless to multimillionaires when you're a PR professional. So if you are a people person, PR might be something you should definitely consider. Here are some of the things you need to succeed in PR as well as you're considering a career in this industry. You need to be a strong writer. Again, there is no media job out there where writing is not going to be important. Even your editor, your videographer, your photographer, you're all going to have to write and know how to be strong writers. So that's one of the key skills you can continue to develop. You need to be able to create in multimedia platforms. You need to be a people person. You need to be able to work well in teams, whether you're the leader or someone who is following a leader. Public speaking is a great quality to have in PR, especially since you're going to be giving lots of presentations. You need to be deadline driven. You have to be able to complete a task on time. You need to be creative and organized. You need to be able to do research, and you should have diverse interests. A lot of that comes from consuming many different types of media, from news to entertainment, pop culture. You should have your finger on the pulse of what's current. And most importantly and overarching, you need to be ethical. You need to be a good person. Again, I will push the importance of writing, not just because this is a writing class, but because it is one of the most important skills in PR. In fact, PR News in 2015 asked hiring managers for public relations firms what skills they needed. 57% listed written communication as the top skill. Media relations was second, so we will be covering that next week as well. So there are lots of blurred lines between PR and journalism. In fact, journalism relies heavily on PR and PR relies heavily on journalists. And so if you are able to connect thinking and writing, it doesn't really matter which industry you choose, you will still need to have those strong writing skills for both traditional and digital formats in order to succeed in either. That means your writing needs to be accurate, clear, brief, precise, concise, and grammatically correct. You need to be able to write in a brand voice, which means that you're taking on the persona of the organization and not writing from your own personal view. And you need to be able to inform, motivate, and persuade, which is where our writing up until this point using SAM, FAJA, and motive appeals is so important. Once you get the writing down, that's where you can add technology and new skills. So these are some of the top requested skills for the PR industry: social media, video production, photography, graphic design, microblogging, which is a lot of social media, but can also be things like live tweeting, blogs, podcasts, vlogs, emails, marketing, web content management, SEO and keywords, analytics, and analysis of analytics. All of these are skills you should be building now so that when you are on the job market, you can have these things that hiring managers are looking for on your resume. Now that you understand a little bit more about PR as an industry, make sure you watch our video, which will include a guest speaker from the PR industry. We will also have a discussion post about the importance of public relations. You will critique a PR campaign using the ROPES process model. And finally, you will do your AP homework on quotation marks.